the day the rain spoke his name. The sunflower house on Maple Street had a way of looking warmer when the sky gave up on being blue, as if yellow paint carried a pocket of summer inside it. From the front window, Lily liked to watch the different kinds of rain that visited their neighborhood. Fat, cheerful drops that made puddles jump, or mist that floated like a secret no one wanted to say too loud. She could name them all as if they were friends. Today's rain was the soft kind, a hush that made people walk slower and listen. Mrs. Harrison said rainy days were good for gentle thoughts, and Lily decided gentle thoughts were exactly the right size for 9-year-old hearts. Breakfast at Sunflower Home was noisy in the best way. Chairs scraping, cereal clinking, someone telling a joke with an ending that wandered off before it arrived. Lily's chair moved through the currents like a little ship, her hands practiced and sure on its rims, stopping where help was needed. She tucked a napkin under Amir's chin. She reached the salt for Tasha, who hated eggs but loved the idea of approving them. She told Marcus that the thunder last night was simply the sky stretching. He pretended he didn't need reassuring, but he ate faster after that. When the plates were cleared and the littlest ones drifted toward art supplies, Mrs. Harrison sat beside Lily and held her mug like it contained the weather. "I was thinking," she began, careful as a librarian turning a page, "about a visit, if you'd like, to the place where your mother is buried." The room changed without moving. Somewhere near the doorway, someone laughed. In Lily's chest, a bird turned its head toward sound it knew. "We can go?" she asked, not too loud because loudness scares birds. "We can really go?" "If you'd like," Mrs. Harrison said again. The way adults do when the answer is already yes, but they want the yes to belong to you. "This afternoon, just the two of us." Lily looked at the picture on the corner of the corkboard, her mother's eye crinkling at the edges, the same particular blue Lily carried everywhere like a seashell in a pocket. She had once tried to look stern in the mirror and realized she could not. The blue ruined all sternness by letting light in. "I'd like that," she said. And then, because her chest felt unexpectedly full, she added, "Thank you." The drive to Oakland Cemetery took the kind of quiet that isn't empty, but careful. The windshield wipers hummed. The windows gathered tiny rivers that ran to meet the doorframes and fell away. The bouquet of daisies, Lily's choice because they were small suns you could hold, nestled in her lap and made the car smell like a sidewalk after rain. "What did she like?" Lily asked as the gates came into view, iron and old with finials like punctuation for sentences about forever. "Olivia liked ocean wind that made a mess of hair," Mrs. Harrison said. She laughed from the middle of her belly. She was brave in ways people don't see when they first look, the quiet kind. "Do I look like her?" Lily asked, though she already knew the answer and wanted it again. "Very much," Mrs. Harrison said, "especially when you're about to argue kindly." They followed the stone path that had memorized 100 feet. The oak tree waited without pretending to be anything but old, and before they reached the simple marker where daisies would go, Lily saw him, a tall man in a dark suit, posture tidy, jaw untidy with the day's unshaven shadow. He leaned forward to place Lily's, their whiteness so white they seemed to hold their own weather. When he turned at the sound of their approach, the world did a strange small thing. It clicked, like a music box finding its tune. He looked from the stone to Lily's face as if her eyes were a mirror he had not expected to survive the storm. His hand went to the headstone to hold him up, but his gaze held on Lily as if he'd found land after 9 years of shoreline. "Those eyes," he said, not like a person seeing a coincidence, like a person recognizing his own house at last. "You have her eyes." Mrs. Harrison's palm found the back of Lily's chair the way a lighthouse finds its light. "We don't mean to intrude," she said, voice wrapped in caution and kindness. "Olivia," the man said, and all at once his professional composure returned to its place like a coat on a hook. "I'm sorry." He looked at the stone again. "I'm Dr. Jackson Bennett," a swallow, a recalibration. "Olivia's husband." Silence put its hands on everyone's shoulders. The rain agreed to be background again. Lily looked at the dates on the stone, at the carved letters that made her mother's name permanent, and then back at the man whose face looked like someone trying not to fall apart in a public place. "That can't be," Mrs. Harrison said, quieter than a secret. The file said I died," he finished for her, a wryness that wasn't humor passing through his mouth and gone. and that my child died with her. He dropped to a knee without thinking, so his eyes were level with Lily's. Up close, he smelled like rain and scrubbed hands and a hospital hallway where news lives. "What's your name?" "Lily," she said, and then, because the question wanted both answers, "Lily Montgomery." He closed his eyes the way doors close against cold. When he opened them, they were holding back water with the same stubbornness a levee uses when it loves the town behind it. "Montgomery," he repeated. Her maiden name. He looked at Mrs. Harrison as if she might confirm history. "When, 9 years ago in October," Mrs. Harrison supplied, voice steady again. "The night the storm cut the power and the hospital generator failed before it didn't. The night emergency rooms were full of too many emergencies." He nodded as if someone had finally said out loud the date he'd been carrying forever in his ribs. He didn't reach for Lily because some part of him was a doctor who knew what permission meant. "May I?" He held out a hand the way people hold out peace. "Only if you want." Lily looked at the daisies, at the lilies, at the way his fingers trembled just enough to make him a person and not a statue. She placed her hand in his. His palm was warm and careful, like a blanket someone remembered to tuck. "You have her hands, too," he whispered, which was a strange thing to say and exactly right. Small, strong, tears found his face without asking. For a long moment, the oak held up its green umbrella while 3 people tried to understand a day the calendar hadn't warned them about. When the first of Lily's tears slipped free, it was not a sad tear, not exactly. It was the kind you cry when the shape of your life suddenly includes a room you didn't know you owned. They didn't stay long. Graves aren't for staying, not when the living are doing something as impossible as beginning. They placed flowers together, daisies beside lilies, yellow beside white, and the colors decided to be friends. On the ride back, Lily asked no questions because her insides were busy. Mrs. Harrison drove very carefully, as if a fragile package rode in the passenger seat, which it did. The next day, the meeting room at Sunflower Home tried to look less like a meeting room. Someone had brought a plate of oatmeal cookies that made the air kind. The chairs had been rearranged to say, "We can be a living room if you need." When Jackson stepped in, not in a suit now but in a blue sweater that made his shoulders look less like defenses and more like shoulders, he carried 2 things, a photo album and a small box wrapped in paper the color of newly polished spoons. "Hello, Lily," he said, and his voice had learned something overnight. It had lost a layer of hospital hallway and found a layer of kitchen. "Hello," she said back, a little shyer when rooms were bright and not rain. "Jackson," she tried, and he smiled like a person whose name had landed correctly. They opened the album together. Pages turned like curtains, revealing a life Lily had been told about but never shown. Olivia on a beach with wind making a map of her hair. Olivia wearing a white coat and a badge kneeling beside a small boy, their foreheads almost touching as if medicine began with listening. Olivia painting a wall a color you would call hope if that were a paint store word. A smear of blue on her cheek like she had been kissed by sky. In one photo, a piano bench held her very carefully and her hands hovered above keys like birds that trusted a branch. Claire de Lune was her favorite, Jackson said, not looking at the picture because he was seeing something else, something alive. She said it sounded like water teaching light how to behave. Lily traced the curve of Olivia's cheek with a fingertip. "Photographs are flat, but sometimes they make your heart feel 3-dimensional. Was she kind?" she asked, because that mattered most. "Yes," Jackson said simply, grateful that the truth could sometimes be a single word, and brave in the quiet way, the kind that keeps other people together. The silver-wrapped box made a small sound when the ribbon slipped loose, like something relieved to be let out. Inside, a music box with a tiny ballerina who stood in 5th position without wobbling. When Lily turned the key, the melody lifted into the room and filled it with what the French call moonlight and mothers call hush, sweet girl. The ballerina turned in a circle that did not apologize for being small and steady. Lily watched the spin and felt something like a compass settling north. "Are you going to stay?" she asked, the question stepping out of her before she could fold it away for later. "I am," Jackson said, and the way he said it did not have the hinges of a promise people say to make a child quiet. It had the weight of a promise adults make to be a better version of themselves. The weeks learned a new rhythm that fit into the old one without breaking it. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, a blue sweater appeared in the doorway, and Lily's chair faced the world with an extra degree of tilt, like a sunflower turning toward a particular piece of sun. They practiced 7 times tables until the 7 stopped acting like strangers and started acting like patterns. They built a tower of paper cranes because someone told Jackson 1,000 could change a life. And he said he didn't believe in magic and then folded the first crane with very careful hands. On Saturday, the house on the hill met Lily in its own language. It tried for grandeur and landed somewhere near lonely. The knob turned too smoothly. The floors shone like a lake no one swam in. A woman named Rosa appeared and disappeared with lunch like a good ghost. Jackson showed Lily the ramp installed at the back with a craftsman's pride he had borrowed from the man who built it, and the widened doorway in a tone people use when they are trying hard in the right direction. And next week the counters go down a bit and the bathroom gets— It's very kind, Lily said, because it was. And because kindness deserves noticing even when it feels like a museum exhibit about kindness. Her room had a quilt with cheerful triangles and animals whose eyes were sewn on with excellent intentions. There was a shelf of books that smelled new, not like anyone had cried into them during a storm. There were stuffed bears with price tags discreetly clipped off, and threads where tags had been as reminders. If you don't like any of it, we can change everything, Jackson said, and he meant it so much it made the air honest. The kitchen was easier than the dining room, and cookies on a plate made ordinary happen. In Switzerland, he began, and the word brought snow into a summer house. There's a program for children with spinal injuries. New therapies, data that's promising. Lily put her spoon down with precision, a small sound like punctuation. I don't want to be something we fix, she said, not angry, just true. I want space, and ramps, and music, and to learn how to make grilled cheese without burning everything. Silence stood with them. Jackson looked at the ceiling and saw a man who had picked the wrong sentence first. You are not a problem, he said, voice unsteady because he cared. You are a person I love. If we talk about treatments, it will be because you want to know what choices look like, not because I need you to match something in my head. Your mother would— He stopped because sometimes names make tears inevitable. Your mother would remind me to see the whole person or she wouldn't let me have coffee. Lily considered this and then nodded once. A motion that meant a bridge was still a bridge even if you had stepped on a loose plank. On the way back to Sunflower Home, the rain had finished and the street smelled like plans. That night, when the house settled and children kept by dreams turned over inside, Mrs. Harrison found Lily awake with lamplight making a small gold room around her. On the quilt, photographs lay like stepping stones. Couldn't sleep? Mrs. Harrison asked, whispering so as not to wake 6 different kinds of sleep. Found this, Lily said, holding out the frame with the piano picture. A folded note hid behind the backing. Ink slanted like someone walking fast. Mrs. Harrison unfolded it carefully, as if paper could bruise. To my darling child, may you always hear the music in life even when others only hear noise. All my love, Mom. Words don't always change anything outside your window, but sometimes they change something so inside you that you stand closer to your own life, without noticing your feet moved. Lily felt the shift, subtle and permanent. She was not a thing to fix, not a mistake to correct. She was a melody someone had written on purpose. And somewhere out there, a man in a blue sweater was learning the harmony. When Lily finally slept, the note rested on her nightstand by the music box. The ballerina had stopped turning, but the room still seemed to turn a little, gently, toward whatever tomorrow wanted to be called. Outside, the sunflower house caught the moonlight and kept it, the way yellow always does. Paper cranes and missing pages. The days after the graveyard encounter felt unlike any others Lily had ever lived. The rain had stopped, the sky turned brighter, but something inside her seemed to hold the sound of falling water as if her heart had decided to remember it forever. She kept the silver music box by her bed, winding it at night so that the ballerina could spin under the lamplight, the tune weaving through her dreams until she drifted off. Jackson, she still stumbled over whether to call him Dad, visited more often now, sometimes after school, sometimes in the evening when the corridors of Sunflower Home were hushed and full of yawns. He didn't always bring gifts. Sometimes he just brought stories, small ones about the hospital, or memories of Olivia, or questions about what Lily liked best about her days. Those moments were becoming a new kind of gift, and Lily tucked them away like pressed flowers in the journal she had started keeping. But there was another current flowing beneath the surface, one that neither she nor Mrs. Harrison could ignore. Jackson was determined to understand how the truth about Lily had been hidden for 9 years. He spoke of the hospital records, of the night of the storm, of confusion and mistakes and whispers of cover-ups. Lily listened quietly as he explained, though part of her wanted to close her ears to shut away the idea that her existence had been misplaced by a pen stroke. Still, curiosity is a seed that grows whether we want it to or not, and Lily wanted to know. One gray morning, Jackson came to Sunflower home with papers tucked under his arm and an expression that looked both tired and sharp. "I need to tell you something," he said, lowering himself into a chair across from Lily, who was working on her multiplication tables. Mrs. Harrison lingered by the doorway, her hands clasped, listening. "I've been speaking with an old nurse, Ms. Delgado. She worked the night you were born." His eyes softened. "She remembers the chaos. The storm took out the power, the generator failed, and babies were moved from one ward to another. Records were handwritten in the dark," she said. "There were questions about an infant's identity. She wrote a note, your mother's name beside a question mark." Lily's fingers stilled on her pencil. "So someone knew?" she whispered. "Someone thought I might be alive?" Jackson nodded slowly. "Yes, but the note was ignored, filed away under a pile of other crises. A clerk made a decision. A supervisor signed off, and the next day they told me I'd lost both my wife and my child." His voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment the polished doctor disappeared, replaced by a man who had carried sorrow like a stone for nearly a decade. The silence stretched until Lily broke it. "They didn't look for me," she said, her voice steady but heavy as if she had suddenly grown older than 9. "They just decided I was gone." Mrs. Harrison stepped closer, resting a hand on Lily's shoulder. "It was negligence, sweetheart, not the truth. And sometimes, when people are afraid of blame, they bury mistakes instead of fixing them." Jackson leaned forward, his voice low but determined. "I'm going to uncover every detail. I promise you, Lily, they won't be allowed to hide this anymore." That afternoon, Lily folded her first paper crane. She had seen the directions in a library book once, the kind that had colorful illustrations and arrows to guide clumsy fingers. It wasn't perfect. The wings were lopsided, the tail crooked. But when she set it on the table, it looked like something ready to take flight. "For luck," she explained when Jackson asked about it. "Mrs. Harrison says Japanese children make 1,000 cranes and it brings miracles. Maybe I can make them for all the kids here. Maybe it will make our home stronger." Jackson smiled at the small, uneven bird as though it were the most perfect thing he had ever seen. Over the next week, Lily made more cranes. Some were bright from scraps of construction paper. Others were plain white from notebook pages. Soon the windowsill in her room looked like a flock waiting for wind. Other children joined in, their laughter echoing through the halls as their clumsy folds turned into hopeful wings. The project became something bigger than just paper. It was a reminder that even fragile shapes could hold power. One Saturday, Jackson took Lily with him to the hospital, not to investigate this time, but to visit the children in the pediatric ward. Lily brought a bag full of her cranes, distributing them one by one. She stopped by the bed of a teenage boy who lay pale and weary, tubes snaking from his arms. "Here," she said, setting a blue crane on his bedside table. "This one is strong. It'll guard your dreams." The boy's lips twitched into the smallest of smiles, and Lily felt a warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't just someone waiting to be helped. She could give too. Later, as Jackson wheeled her back to the car, he spoke softly. "I need to say something about when I suggested Switzerland." Lily's stomach clenched, but she listened. "I was wrong. I thought about you as a patient, not as Lily. You are perfect as you are, and I will only ever talk about treatments if you want them. You get to choose, always." For a moment, Lily didn't respond. The city moved around them. Cars, lights, the faint smell of bread from a nearby bakery. Then she said, "Thank you. That makes me feel seen." Jackson reached for her hand briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "Your mother would have said the same thing. She used to tell me that doctors needed to stop seeing what was broken and start seeing who was whole." His throat tightened. "I failed her memory that day. I won't fail it again." That night, when Lily returned to her room, she added something to her journal. She drew a crane beside the words, "Sometimes even fathers need fixing. Not with medicine, with love." But beneath the warmth of these new beginnings, a shadow still lingered. Jackson's investigation was uncovering pieces of a story that had been buried for years, and every discovery led to more questions. Ms. Delgado promised to meet him again, this time with a copy of the incident log from that stormy night. She hinted that there had been pressure from administrators to move on quickly, to avoid scandal about the failing generator. Somewhere in that log, Jackson believed, lay the missing page of Lily's life, the proof that negligence, not fate, had kept them apart. And so, as autumn deepened and the leaves outside the sunflower home turned to fire, the paper cranes multiplied, their fragile wings whispering promises of miracles, while the truth waited, heavy and unfinished, in the quiet corners of hospital archives. A house that breathes. The following weeks felt like someone had picked up Lily's world and tilted it ever so slightly, so that all the pieces began sliding into new patterns. The paper cranes lined the windows of Sunflower Home like a gathering flock, each one a fragile promise folded by small hands. Some cranes were perfect, their wings sharp and balanced, while others leaned sideways or looked more like frogs than birds. Yet every child who had folded one insisted their crane would bring the most luck. The dining room began to feel different too. The children would laugh and point to the flock in the window, whispering that the paper birds were carrying their hopes higher each day. Even Mrs. Harrison admitted that the house felt lighter, as though invisible windows had been opened inside it. But for Jackson, the air was heavy with determination. He had secured copies of hospital records, faded papers that smelled faintly of damp storage and regret. In the dim light of his study, he read the words again and again, lines written hastily, dates scrawled, signatures scribbled. And there, among the smudged ink, was the note that Ms. Delgado had spoken of. Verify infant ID. Montgomery? The question mark lingered on the page like a ghost. It was proof that someone had suspected the truth, that Lily had not been lost at all but mistaken for another. Yet the note had been ignored, tucked into the shuffle of emergencies, and the lives of two families had been broken apart in silence. Jackson's jaw tightened as he imagined Olivia's last hours, her courage, her pain, her love, and how she would have wanted their daughter to grow up surrounded by truth, not shadows. When Jackson visited Sunflower Home that Saturday, he carried something different with him. Not a gift in a bag or an album of photographs, but a roll of papers under his arm, their edges curled and faintly smudged with graphite. "I've been working on something," he explained, unrolling the sheets across the common room table where the children sometimes built puzzles. Blue lines and neat numbers sprawled across the paper, architectural drawings filled with measurements, arrows, and notations that meant little to anyone but builders. But when Jackson pointed to the shapes, Lily's eyes began to widen. "This is your house," she said, her finger tracing the outline of rooms she remembered from her visit. "Yes," Jackson nodded, "but it won't stay like that. Not anymore. I'm changing it, see here? The hallways will be wider, so you can roll your chair easily. The kitchen counters will lower with a switch so you can reach everything yourself. The bathroom will have a roll-in shower and I'm adding handrails. And here," he pointed to a square marked near the garden, "is a sunroom, with wide glass windows so you can grow flowers indoors during the winter. I thought maybe daisies." For a moment, Lily didn't know what to say. Her heart thudded in her chest, not because of the details of construction, but because of what it meant. He wasn't simply visiting her life. He was making space for her inside his own. "You're changing your whole house," she whispered at last. Jackson's face softened. "It wasn't a home before," he admitted. "It was just a place to sleep, but now, I want it to be somewhere you feel welcome, somewhere we both belong." Lily wheeled closer, her fingers brushing the paper lightly, almost reverently. She had never seen someone rearrange their world to fit her before. Sunflower Home had been a place of warmth, but its old hallways and narrow doors were often reminders that she had to squeeze herself into spaces not built for her. These lines on paper felt like an invitation to breathe freely. "It's a lot of work," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. "Just for me," Jackson shook his head. "Not just for you, for us. Because this house should tell the truth about who lives there. And the truth is I have a daughter now." That night Lily could not stop thinking about it. She traced the note her mother had written, the one she had found hidden behind the photo, and whispered it to herself. "May you always hear the music in life, even when others only hear noise." Perhaps her mother had known this moment would come, when love would rewrite walls and build windows where there had been none. A week later, Jackson invited her back to the house to see the changes as they began. The once pristine mansion was alive with the noise of hammers, drills, and workers moving through hallways with ladders and tool belts. Lily laughed at the sight of dust where polished wood had once gleamed, and at Jackson's expression of mild embarrassment when a worker shouted across the hall for more nails. "It's a mess," Jackson admitted, "but it's a good kind of mess, I think." As they walked through the rooms, Lily noticed how the house was changing. The grand dining room had been cleared of its heavy chairs, making space wide enough for her chair to move without bumping. The kitchen counters, though still in progress, had sections with adjustable heights. And in the corner of the living room stood something that made her breath catch. A piano, newly tuned, its keys polished so they shone. "It was your mother's," Jackson explained softly. "I had it restored. She used to play every evening. I thought, maybe someday you'd like to learn." Lily wheeled closer, her fingers hovering above the ivory keys but not pressing them. "I'd like that," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. The thought of sitting where her mother once had, filling the house with music that belonged to both of them, felt like a bridge across years. Yet not everything was smooth. A woman from child services arrived one afternoon, her expression polite but her questions sharp. She spoke of legal guardianship, of whether Jackson was ready to take responsibility, of whether a surgeon with long hours could provide the stability Lily needed. Mrs. Harrison sat beside Lily, her voice calm but firm, reminding the woman that Lily had already found something precious. The beginning of a bond. The proof of love shown not in promises but in action. Still, the questions lingered like shadows, casting doubt even as the renovations echoed with hammers of hope. That evening, after the social worker left, Lily found Jackson standing on the half-built ramp outside, staring at the blueprint as though trying to measure his own worth. She wheeled beside him quietly. "You don't have to be perfect," she said, repeating words Mrs. Harrison often told the children. "You just have to stay." Jackson looked at her, the tension in his shoulders easing, and nodded. "I'll stay. Always." The paper cranes had followed Lily to Jackson's house now, tucked into corners, balanced on shelves, one perched proudly on top of the piano. They seemed to belong in the dust and sunlight, their wings spread as if urging everyone to believe that miracles were already in flight. But beneath all this, the hospital's silence weighed heavy. Jackson had pushed for answers, and Ms. Delgado had promised him more. She spoke of meetings where supervisors whispered of liability, of funding that might have collapsed if the truth about the generator failure had been exposed. Somewhere, she said, there were files, hidden but not lost, that could prove the negligence. Jackson knew that finding those documents could change everything. For Lily, it meant justice. For himself, it meant the closing of a wound that had never healed. And so, even as the house transformed into a place that breathed with new life, the shadows of the past stretched long across their path. The walls were being rebuilt, but the truth still waited, buried in archives where questions had been smothered 9 years ago. The long night. The winter sky had a way of swallowing the light too early, and on this particular evening, the shadows outside Sunflower Home crept in faster than anyone wanted. Lily sat in the common room with her paper cranes spread across the table, carefully arranging them in patterns that only she seemed to understand. The cranes had become her secret army, each one folded with quiet determination, as though every crease carried a piece of hope that could not be bent out of shape. Jackson sat nearby, his coat draped over the back of a chair, flipping through yet another copy of the hospital records. His eyes were tired but sharp, scanning every line, every signature, every corner for the truth he knew was still being hidden. Earlier that week, Ms. Delgado had come to him with trembling hands and a thin folder of papers she had kept all these years, tucked away at the bottom of a box marked personal. In it was the incident log from the night of the storm, with her handwriting scrawled across the margins. "Verify infant ID, Montgomery." She explained how she had raised her concerns to her supervisor, but had been told to drop it. "Too much confusion," they had said. "Too many emergencies. We need to move forward." At the time, she had been a nurse with no authority, and the words had become buried under the fear of lawsuits, funding cuts, and blame. But now, years later, she looked at Jackson with guilt shining in her eyes. "I should have fought harder," she whispered. "I should have made them listen." Jackson had taken her hands gently and shaken his head. You're doing the right thing now. That's what matters. Yet in his chest a storm raged hotter than the one that had taken out the hospital's power that night. Negligence had stolen 9 years from him and from Lily. Negligence had left Olivia to die without him by her side. And negligence had told a little girl she was alone in the world when she never had been. The legal system was slow, but momentum had begun to gather. A custody hearing was scheduled. It was to determine whether Lily would remain at Sunflower Home, continue under state care, or whether Jackson, newly discovered father, would be granted full guardianship. The thought of it left Lily's stomach tangled in knots. She loved Sunflower Home. It had been her world, her family, her comfort, and yet the idea of living with Jackson, of finally belonging somewhere that had been built with her in mind, filled her with a fragile kind of excitement. She was torn between 2 homes, 2 truths, and 2 futures. On the morning of the hearing, the sky was the color of pewter, and the cold bit through layers of coats and scarves. Jackson picked Lily up early, his face lined with worry, though he tried to hide it. "You ready?" he asked, fastening her seatbelt with the same care he might use to hold glass. Lily nodded, though inside she felt like she was carrying a box too heavy for her small hands. Mrs. Harrison rode with them, her presence a steadying anchor. The courthouse was vast, its marble floors echoing with footsteps that sounded far too important. In the waiting room, Lily sat with her hands folded in her lap, her paper crane tucked secretly into her pocket like a talisman. Jackson paced near the window, his jaw tight, his phone buzzing against his palm. Finally it rang again, and when he answered, his face changed instantly. "What?" His voice dropped, his tone urgent. "How bad?" There was a pause, and then he pressed his hand over his eyes. "I'll be right there." When he hung up, his eyes met Mrs. Harrison's first, then Lily's. "There's been an accident. A pile-up on the highway. Multiple children injured. They need me in the operating room immediately." He was torn, the weight of 2 impossible choices pressing down on him. The hearing, "Go," Mrs. Harrison said firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You're a surgeon. Those children need you. We'll stay." Jackson's chest rose and fell as though the decision was trying to crush him. He knelt in front of Lily, cupping her hand in both of his. "I don't want you to think this means I'm not choosing you," he whispered. "I'm always choosing you. Remember that." Lily's eyes glistened, but she nodded bravely. "Go save them," she said. "That's what Mom would want." He kissed her forehead quickly, and then he was gone, his footsteps vanishing down the marble hallway, leaving Lily and Mrs. Harrison in a silence that felt heavier than stone. Inside the courtroom, the judge sat high at the bench, his expression neutral, his voice steady. Social workers spoke first, their words clinical and careful. They spoke of Lily's needs, of the years she had spent in care, of Jackson's demanding career and whether he could provide stability. For a moment, it seemed as though the tide might turn against him. Lily's hands shook as she held her crane in her pocket, her thumb brushing its folded wing. Then Mrs. Harrison spoke. Her voice carried not authority but truth. She told the judge about the girl who comforted other children with napkins at breakfast, who made paper birds to bring hope into a home full of grief, who had met a stranger at her mother's grave and had the courage to reach out her hand. She spoke of Jackson, too, of the way he had not simply claimed his daughter but had begun reshaping his life and his home to make space for her. She reminded them that love was not measured in hours on a schedule, but in the willingness to change, to show up, and to stay. Then, to everyone's surprise, Ms. Delgado entered the courtroom. Her hands trembled as she swore to tell the truth, and her testimony spilled out like a dam breaking. She spoke of the generator failure, the chaos, the mislabeled wristband, the note she had written that was ignored. She admitted her guilt, her silence, her fear of punishment, and then she looked directly at the judge. "That child was never lost," she said. "She was abandoned by a system that valued convenience over truth, and Dr. Bennett has the right to reclaim the years he was robbed of." The judge listened, his expression unreadable. He looked at Lily then, his gaze softening. "You've heard many words today," he said gently, "but I want to hear from you. What do you want, Lily?" The room went still. Every eye turned to her. She felt the paper crane in her pocket, its wings pressing into her palm, reminding her that she was not fragile. She was strong, she was whole, and she had a voice. Slowly she wheeled forward, lifting her chin. "I want both my homes," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the chamber. "I love Sunflower Home and I love Mrs. Harrison, But I also love my dad. I don't want to lose either. I want a family that tells the truth. I want a life where I can stay with him and still be part of here. I want to be Lily Montgomery Bennett. Not an orphan. Not a mistake. Just me. The judge's eyes softened further, and silence pressed down like the pause before a symphony's final note. Thank you, Lily, he said. His gavel struck once, echoing like thunder. This court will deliberate. As Lily sat back, her heart racing, she knew that whatever came next, the truth was finally awake. The shadows that had hidden her story for 9 years had been dragged into the light. She had spoken for herself, and for the first time, she felt not like a child waiting for decisions, but like someone shaping her own future. That night, back at Sunflower Home, she wrote in her journal beneath the lamplight, "Even in the longest night, paper cranes can fly. Even in the darkest room, truth finds a window. And in the hospital miles away, Jackson was still in surgery, saving lives with steady hands, unaware that his daughter had just saved both of theirs with her words." Sunflowers in winter, the morning of the verdict dawned cold and pale, the kind of winter day where the sky seemed to hold its breath, waiting for news it didn't yet know. Inside Sunflower Home, the children whispered around their bowls of oatmeal, their voices carrying both curiosity and quiet prayers. Lily sat at her usual place by the window, her paper cranes gathered on the sill behind her, each one watching as though waiting for flight. She traced her spoon through the steam rising from her bowl, her thoughts far away in a courtroom where her future was being written not only by laws, but by love. Mrs. Harrison placed a gentle hand on her shoulder as if to steady her against the weight of all that hung in the balance. Jackson arrived later that morning, his face drawn with fatigue. He had spent most of the night in surgery, his hands saving the lives of children who would not have seen another sunrise without him. Yet when he walked into the common room and saw Lily waiting, he managed a tired smile that was made of hope. He knelt down beside her wheelchair, his voice soft. "No matter what the judge decides, you will never lose me again." Those words pressed into Lily's heart like sunlight through frosted glass, soft but unbreakable. At the courthouse, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. The judge read through the case file, his expression solemn, while lawyers shuffled papers and whispered into each other's ears. Then, in a voice that carried across the chamber, he spoke. "In light of the testimony presented, the negligence uncovered, and the extraordinary devotion demonstrated by Dr. Bennett, this court grants full legal guardianship of Lily Montgomery to her biological father, Dr. Jackson Bennett." He paused, letting the words sink in. Furthermore, the court recognizes the significant role Sunflower Home has played in this child's life. Therefore, provisions will be made to ensure that Lily may continue her ties with the community and individuals there who have served as her family. Lily's eyes brimmed with tears as she clutched the paper crane in her pocket, its folded wings warm from her hand. Mrs. Harrison squeezed her shoulder, her eyes glistening with a mixture of joy and sorrow. Jackson bowed his head briefly, his jaw tight as though holding back the flood of emotion threatening to break free. When he looked up, his gaze found Lily's, and in that silent exchange the years of loss were eclipsed by the certainty of belonging. The weeks that followed were filled with changes, but unlike the sterile, abrupt changes that had once stolen her past, these were tender and deliberate, shaped by love. Jackson's house slowly transformed into something more than a blueprint. The hallways widened, the ramps completed, the kitchen counters adjusted with a quiet hum at the touch of a button, the sunroom filled with the gentle fragrance of daisies and violets, pots lined up along the wide glass windows where sunlight spilled like liquid gold. In the center of it all stood the piano, restored and polished, its keys waiting patiently for new hands. Lily's first night in her new room was both strange and beautiful. The quilt on her bed was no longer stiff and new, but softened by use, carrying the scent of fresh laundry and the faint trace of lavender from Rosa's careful hands. On the shelves sat not only the toys Jackson had bought in his eager rush to please her, but also the mismatched treasures she brought from Sunflower Home. A drawing Marcus had given her, a small stuffed rabbit from Amir, and of course, a line of paper cranes perched like guardians. She lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and listening to the quiet hum of a house that no longer felt like a museum, but like a place learning to breathe. Not all the changes were easy. Jackson stumbled at times, Forgetting small routines Lily was used to, misjudging how much independence to give her, overcompensating in ways that made her bristle. There were moments of frustration, moments where Lily retreated into her journal, where Jackson sat in his study feeling like he had failed again. But each mistake was met not with silence but with conversation. "You don't have to fix everything," Lily told him once, her eyes serious. "You just have to listen." And Jackson, humbled by the wisdom in her words, nodded and learned. Slowly, the house became a place not of perfection, but of forgiveness and growth. The hospital's negligence did not vanish quietly into the night. With Ms. Delgado's testimony and the incident log now in the open, the administration faced public scrutiny. Articles appeared in the local paper, headlines speaking of cover-ups and accountability. The hospital board, under pressure, issued a formal apology, not only to Jackson but also to Lily. They pledged to honor Olivia's memory by funding a new accessibility and music therapy wing at the pediatric hospital, naming it the Olivia Montgomery Center for Healing Through Music. When Lily visited the site for the first time, her eyes widened at the rows of instruments and the wide-open spaces designed for children in wheelchairs. "It's like Mom is still helping kids," she whispered, her hand resting on the piano keys that would soon belong to children who needed them most. Winter deepened, and one afternoon the first snow began to fall, soft flakes drifting against the windows like delicate confetti. Lily and Jackson stood by the ramp that now led easily into their home, watching as Rosa sprinkled salt on the steps and laughed at the sight of the snow-covered garden. Lily's hands gripped her wheels, her face mischievous. "Race you," she declared suddenly, and before Jackson could answer, she pushed forward, her wheelchair rolling down the ramp into the snowy yard. Jackson laughed, chasing after her, his shoes slipping slightly on the icy ground. Their laughter rang out into the winter air, startling a flock of birds into flight. For once, the house did not feel grand or lonely. It felt alive. That evening, after they had both warmed themselves by the fire, Jackson lifted the cover of the piano. "Ready?" he asked. Lily nodded, settling beside him with her small hands poised above the keys. Together they played, Jackson on the lower notes, Lily picking out the melody of Claire de Lune with trembling fingers that grew steadier with each note. The sound filled the house, soft and imperfect, yet more beautiful than anything that had ever echoed within those walls. Rosa listened from the kitchen, her eyes wet, while the snow fell silently outside. The next day they returned to Olivia's grave. The oak tree stood bare, its branches laced with frost. Jackson laid lilies as always, but this time Lily placed her daisies beside them, her hand steady. Together the colors rested against the cold stone, white and yellow, grief and hope. Lily pulled from her coat pocket the folded note she had found behind the photo frame and read it aloud once more. "May you always hear the music in life, even when others only hear noise." Then she tucked it gently into the music book that Jackson had brought, slipping it between the pages so that the words would live among the songs her mother had once played. As they stood in silence, Jackson placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. "She would be proud," he whispered. Lily looked up at him, her blue eyes shining. "We'll keep hearing the music," she said softly, "even when the world hears only noise." And in that moment, under the gray winter sky surrounded by snow and silence, they were no longer strangers bound by tragedy. They were father and daughter, a family forged not only by blood but by truth, by courage, and by love that had survived the longest night to finally bloom like sunflowers in winter.